This week, a federal judge decided to rule that a gun reform law that essentially prevents people between the ages of 18 to 20 from purchasing handguns is unconstitutional. So a 20-year-old man by the name of John Corey Frazier, along with several other plaintiffs in this case, challenged the constitutionality of the Gun Control Act of 1968. And through that Gun Control Act, it essentially regulated the age in which an individual can purchase a handgun. So it barred people from the ages of 18 to 20 from being able to buy a firearm, even though they're considered adults. You have to be at least 21 years old. Well, US District Judge Robert Payne, who is a George W. Bush appointee in Virginia, argued that under the guidance laid out in a 2022 Supreme Court ruling, federal regulations limiting 18-year-olds from purchasing weapons goes against the Second Amendment. And Cenk, unfortunately, he just kept going back to the Supreme Court on this over and over again. Elections do matter. Who ends up appointing Supreme Court justices matters a lot. And I think we're starting to see the ramifications of having a pretty far right Supreme Court. But nonetheless, back to this federal judge, because the statutes and regulations in question are not consistent with our nation's history and tradition, the judge wrote, they therefore cannot stand. And he referenced the Supreme Court's ruling's instruction that lower courts look to the gun regulations that were in effect during the Constitution's framing and decide whether a current gun law violates the Second Amendment. And by the way, that SCOTUS decision said that judges should no longer consider whether the law serves public interests, like enhancing public safety. And so the Judge Payne, decided that restricting people between the ages of 18 to 20 from owning handguns was inconsistent with the Second Amendment. Payne, who cited the 2022 Supreme Court ruling repeatedly in his ruling, wrote that the government failed to present any evidence of age-based restrictions on the purchase or sale of firearms from the colonial era, founding or early republic. The lack of similar regulations from those time periods indicates that the founders considered age-based regulations on the purchase of firearms to circumscribe the right to keep and bear arms confirmed by the Second Amendment, he wrote. I just think that the way one interprets the Constitution says a lot about them as a judge. And I think that the interpretation here, originally by the Supreme Court, Sharon, is questionable to say the least, because I think that they're extending their own personal biases onto what they believe the framers of the Constitution wanted. But I'm curious what you think about that.
I think they're doing backflips to make sure that there are as many guns out there as possible, and that these manufacturers get richer and richer. And there's this hypocrisy within the courts, because some of these same judges will say, yeah, they don't need to learn about Harriet Tubman. Some of these people won't be happy until kids get to take a course where they can print out the gun and be really proficient in that. And then that'll square it. Everything will be great once that happens. It's how many, flips can I do to make sure that my side wins and my ideology is king?
Yeah. One of our members, Minky C, the Silver Dragon, just made this point as well. But we just did a story about how some Republicans want to move the voting age to 25 because people under 25 are too immature to vote. But people who are 18 to 20, not immature to own a gun. I mean, I don't know anything that describes Republican ideology better than that. Okay, oh no, don't let them vote, But make sure they have really dangerous assault weapons and can kill anyone they like at an incredible pace. Does that make any sense? Of course not. Is it wildly hypocritical? Yes. By the way, is it popular? No, that's why they need the courts to do it. Because here, let me read you graphic 7 here. According to a Quinnipiac University poll, very legitimate, one of the best polling organizations, 91% of Democrats, 76% of independents, and 59% of Republicans would raise the minimum age to buy any gun to 21. But now you have the courts, the right wingers on courts all across the country going, look guys, what part of Citizens United was complicated? We told you, we don't give a goddamn about your democracy. We're gonna hand this government over to only right-wingers and super rich people. So we already legalized bribery, and now we have this insane precedent that Clarence Thomas came up with. I'll come back to that in a second. So now we're gonna use it to just deny you any laws that are favorable. You got overall, that's over 70% of Americans want this law. You can't have it. What do you think, you live in a democracy? No, I'm gonna be an activist judge and say, even though you definitely want that law, and there's nothing wrong with that law, and it's a perfectly logical law, I'm not gonna give it to you. Why? Because Clarence Thomas wrote this insane ruling where he's like, no, I think the rules should be based on what they thought in the 1700s. What?
It's ridiculous.
And so now all of these judges all across the country, and it's not just conservatives, like even the liberal judges, moderate judges, they have to like go through the history books and analyze, well, would they have wanted this in 1721? How about in 1757, 1789? Would they have, they didn't have assault weapons back then. Okay, so how do you decide if they wanted assault weapons? How do you decide if they wanted, by the way, if we're going back to that standard, why are you applying it only to guns? Why don't we apply it to everything? The founding fathers despised corporations and thought they shouldn't have any of the power that they have now, let alone the idea that they're human beings with constitutional rights. The founding fathers were 100% against that. You want to go back to that, Clarence Thomas? Oh no, but then how would you get your $500,000 vacation from your corporate donor who owns you?
And look, I gotta say something, because I don't even know how I feel about that regulation, right? Because we seem to think that it's totally fine to send 18-year-olds to war, which we do all the time in this country. But we also don't let anyone drink until they're 21. And in this case, if we're ready and willing to arm them and send them abroad, it does seem a little weird to have this one particular regulation pertaining to guns impact those between the ages of 18 and 20. I'm not, I don't have any strong feelings about it. It's something that I haven't even really thought much about, and I'm willing to change my mind. But what I think stands out about this story more than anything, regardless of how you feel about that particular regulation, is the fact that if you have this country ruled by activist judges, it really doesn't even matter who you elect into Congress or what kind of legislation they're able to pass and enact. If the corporate powers that be decide they want to challenge it, they will, and they'll challenge it all the way to the Supreme Court, where the activist judges will have their way. And that's what's terrifying about this story. What it actually says about our judicial system, our system of government, and how it really, we have everything stacked in the favor of corporate interests. In this particular case, in the favor of gun manufacturers.
By the way, you also can't have a Coors Light at 18, but apparently you could have an Uzi or an AR-15. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.